So an obviously emotional FBI agent there telling us what many people had long feared. Gabby Petito, it is believed, has been found dead near the Spread Creek campsite in Grand Teton National Park. The autopsy has not yet provided a cause of death, and in fact, it has not yet provided absolutely confirmation of her identity. However, you notice that there, in the photos of her, there are tattoos on her arms and so forth. There are ways to make a presumptive identification, and that, it appears, is what the FBI has done in this case. They started the news conference by saying, "We offer our condolences to Gabby's family, and we ask for your thoughts and prayers." Let's bring in Dr. Michael Baden. He is a forensic examiner and obviously forensic pathologist, I should say, and a Fox News contributor. I have not seen too many cases, Dr. Baden, where police release a name without having an absolute identification, positive identification. What would be the reason in this case?
Well, nowadays, police want to wait for DNA to come back, number one. That may take a day or two once they draw the specimen at the autopsy. But as you pointed out, the tattoos on her arms that are apparent in the video when she's interviewed by the police that you showed just a few minutes ago are very unique, unusual tattoos. And even after 25 days, taking into account decomposition over the time, tattoos are very durable and protected by the outer layer of the skin. They're in the underlayers of the skin. And that would have been enough to make a definite identification for unusual tattoos. But they're going to wait to get DNA also, dental records that they may have comparisons that the family gave her dental records days ago, and also x-rays that they'll take of bones. So the identification will be completed within a day or two, I suspect. But right now, it's really, for all intents and purposes, it's a definite identification. It isn't anybody else. The next point of view is what is the cause of death, and that'll take the autopsy. The body is still probably at the site where she was found, because the person in charge of that body is the coroner. The FBI does not have their own medical examiner coroner. They'll wait there for the coroner to come and make a decision on moving the body. They have a lot of potential trace evidence at the scene. Shoe prints that he could have left days ago, but more likely a cigarette butt, a soda can, a beer can that may have been discarded at the scene, that would have fingerprints and DNA on it even after 25 days.
And what about the prospects of figuring out cause of death? I know that there are, situations where, asphyxiation, choking, strangling, that kind of thing, that can be very hard to determine.
Yeah, yes, and what you hit on is the most common type. If this is a homicide, the circumstances suggest strangulation being the most likely reason. A shooting or a stabbing or being hit in the head with a baseball bat, if those were done, they would be easy to identify even at this later date. The holes in the body, the fractures would still be there even though there's a lot of decomposition. The neck injuries are going to be very important. Looking for hemorrhage underneath the skin to look for whether there are fractures of any of the windpipe bones, the bones in the larynx, the hyoid bone, the thyroid cartilage, the Adam's apple. The coroner medical examiner there will be looking for. So if there's a manual strangulation, they should still find some hemorrhages and fractures that could be identified, but that takes a very careful dissection, especially because of the decomposition of the soft tissues.
Let's bring in the former homicide detective, Ted Williams. Ted, you have obviously conducted many investigations like this. Where do police start now that they have found a body, and the presumptive identification is that it is that of Gabby Petito.
Well, first of all, I send my condolences also out to the family. And I also agree with everything that my good friend Michael Baden has said here. What is going to be essential and important is to find out the manner and the cause of death here. But what we now have, and they are going to treat that entire area as a crime scene. And as a result of that, they're going to cordon off that area and keep it cordoned off, looking for any physical evidence or any trace evidence, anything that will help them to find out what actually happened to Gabby here. At this stage, clearly, we do not know. But I can tell you that this case, when it comes to Brian Laundrie, the man who last, from all indications, saw her alive, he can turn quickly from a person of interest to a suspect pursuant and based upon what they find based upon the autopsy. So as you heard the FBI agent, they still want the public's help. They want the public to remain engaged, trying to get as much information as they can. I have said before, they're still looking at any videotapes that they can find in that area to show that van, to show when and if Gabby was in the van with Brian Laundrie, and they're also looking at circumstances of videos that would show when she was not in that van. All of those things are part of this investigation. And so I think the public still has a role here, John, and that is that they can continue to give the law enforcement as much information as they conceivably can.
And, you know, some of that information goes back a while. Gabby hasn't been seen publicly. I mean, last spoke to her mother, I believe it was, on September 1st. So we're going back several weeks.
Yeah, but John, the last time we actually know that she spoke to her mother was August the 25th. There was a conversation between her mother and Gabby.
Right.
And after August the 25th, the mother received several text messages. The mother has even come forward and said, meaning Gabby's mother, that she's not sure that Gabby actually sent out those text messages. Quite naturally, that's also a part of this investigation.
And obviously, police will be able to pinpoint where that phone was when those text messages were sent by triangulating the cell towers that were employed, right?
You're absolutely right. I suspect that that has been part of the investigation already, that they were trying to find out what cell phone towers the ping came from Gabby's cell phone. And that's also very essential. And it probably was also essential in them actually locating Gabby's possible remains, because as we've said, they've not said 100%, but the thing that caught my eye, and I think it caught yours also, John, was that at the beginning of the press conference, the FBI agent made it clear that he had contacted Gabby's parents to offer his condolences. So that right away alerted me that there's a strong likelihood that the body that they found there, and with the marks that Michael Baden just spoke about, it is in fact Gabby.
Is it too early, Ted, to call this a murder investigation? I suppose, you know, there's always the chance of an accidental death in this case, or, you know, a tumble off of a ledge, or who knows what. But there are an awful lot of questions to be asked here. What would you call it?
Well, I think they're going to continue to treat it as a death investigation. But I think it is a little early and a little presumptuous at this stage to call it a homicide investigation. I do believe that they are going to treat that area, though, as a crime scene, and they are going to investigate it under those circumstances. And you're right, John. We don't know what happened to Gabby. She could have slipped and fell, or there could have been many things that happened to Gabby. And the law enforcement officers, as well as the coroner office, is going to be able to ferret out the various questions that we have. But what we do know, and what is very suspicious, is that a man who says he loves a woman takes that woman, Gabby, all the way across country, and then leaves and come back to the Florida area, meaning Brian Laundrie, alone, and immediately lawyers up, and immediately exercise his constitutional rights to remain silent. Those things alone, to me, are very suspicious about Brian and maybe his possible involvement in the death of possibly the body that they found Gabby.
And
John?
yeah, go ahead, Dr. Baden.
Yeah, just to add something to what you just said. Right, we don't know what the cause of death is till the autopsy's done, but one of the things that has to also be considered is a drug overdose, and or whether or not she was taking any medications or didn't take medications that she was supposed to take. But ruling in or out drugs of abuse or a drug overdose under these circumstances is going to be very important, and the length of time that she's been dead will not interfere with the toxicology that will be started by collection of material, tissue, and fluids by the coroner in Wyoming when they do the autopsy. And that also has to be kept in mind as a possible cause of death, or something that might be raised as a cause of death if there should be a trial of somebody, if this turned out to be definitely a homicide.
Dr.
Michael, Michael, would you agree with me that you find it very mysterious that this man, Brian, would come back all the way across country and not cooperating in this investigation?
Ted, I agree with you 100%. However, that's not going to be allowed to necessarily come into trial if there were a murder trial.
Dr. Baden, I just wanted to ask, is there any general rule of thumb as to how long it will take to determine a cause of death in this case?
I think that in 24 hours they're going to probably be able to determine a cause of death, because the most likely reason is, as you say, probably manual strangulation or some kind of traumatic injury, blunt force trauma, stabbing, gun, which there's no evidence for, which all will be available at the time of the autopsy. If they don't have a cause of death at the time of the autopsy, that would mean they're going to be looking further into the toxicology, which will be done anyway. The toxicology may take a few days to do if they rush it through. But there's a delay in toxicology sometimes, but not in the other causes of death.
This investigation really stretches almost all the way across the country, from the far northwest corner of Wyoming, where apparently Gabby's body has been found, according to the FBI, down to the southeast and the state of Florida, where Northport police, who've been looking for her boyfriend and reportedly fiance, Brian Laundrie, just put out this tweet. It reads, "Saddened and heartbroken to learn that Gabby has been found deceased. Our focus from the start, along with the FBI and national partners, has been to bring her home. We will continue to work with the FBI in the search for more answers." It's hard to say there is good news here, Ted, but there are many people who have loved ones disappear and they never know what happened to them. In this case, police say they have located the body that they believe to be Gabby, and her parents will be able to bury her and will be able to have at least some closure that some families never get.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. These are various sad circumstances. And yes, we do have people all over this country, unfortunately, that go missing. But what I think amplified this story more than anything else is the fact that this man, who was supposed to have been the fiance of Gabby, takes her all the way across country. We know that they went across country. And then when he comes back to lawyer up, he's by himself, he's without Gabby, he lawyers up, and then the one thing he does is remain silent. He exercises constitutional rights that he certainly had, and those rights were to remain silent. So the sad part about it is, this man says, I love this woman, but I'm not going to help you all find her. I'm not going to tell you what I know. I'm not going to tell you when I last saw her. All of the things that could have helped the authorities find Gabby perhaps maybe sooner. As Michael Baden said, we really don't know the manner or the cause of death, but I do agree with Michael that within a 24-hour period here, we perhaps may know something about the actual cause of death. And as Michael has said, it could be anything from strangulation to a gunshot wound, or maybe she slipped and fell. There are so many things that one could speculate about, but I think we're all going to have to hold off in reserve until we see what the coroner's office come up with.
I'm Steve Ducey.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.